And as the good Congressman mentioned, I am J. Kyle Bryant. I am a Senior Grants Management Specialist with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Region 4, headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. I now work in the Environmental Justice Division. We're now an official division in our agency. And by way of introduction, just a little bit about me. I am a senior environmental protection specialist, as I mentioned. I'm also project officer for one of the two environmental justice thriving communities technical assistance centers that service the Region 4 states. That's 8 states here in the Southeast. And I'm also a acting project officer for the Grant Maker Grant, which is another resource, a new initiative being funded by the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm also the environmental justice liaison for the states of Mississippi and North Carolina, and the liaison within Region 4 for the Superfund Emergency Management Division and our HR division, MSD. I'm a certified grant writing instructor and a former HBCU grants administrator for my alma mater, undergraduate alma mater, Fort Valley State University here in Georgia. And I have over 30 years experience working with EJ communities directly and on EJ related matters. So the goal for today's session will be ensuring that you'll be able to identify the fundamental components of a proposal. You'll be able to have a basic proposal writing knowledge and knowledge of where the resources are pertaining to grants. And you'll be in a better position to understand the role of the internet in grantsmanship. And you'll have strategies for improving your search skills using the internet. And you'll be able to search for grant opportunities and have a better understanding of the fatal errors and common mistakes that often doom otherwise good proposals. To get the most out of this session, I just really want you to get the big picture. What do you need to know to get started? And don't sweat the details. The goal is to give you basics and strategies for learning how to get to the details when you need them. Proposal writing, though, is a team effort. So it really requires people with writing skills, administration skills, an accountant or bookkeeping skills, project staff, consultants, and others.
Kyle, if you can please share your screen, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know it wasn't sharing. I hit share. Let me go back to that. Here we go. All right. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
All right. My apologies. Okay, so once again, that's my introduction I just shared with you. So forgive me for that. And since this is going to be recorded, you'll be able to see this over again. So once again, my apologies. This is where I left off. So some of the objectives we're gonna give an overview of the benefits of proposal writing, sources of support and assistance, the funding mechanisms, the best role for your organization, and to meet the competition, which are all of you on this call, and for you all to be able to network hopefully after that. So the first steps. Why do you want to write a proposal? And I have a poll question you can pull up now, if you would, please. But do you want to, why do you want to seek grant funding, in other words? These are your choices. Please select one, or if it's more than one, if it'll allow you to. Do you want to fund a worthwhile project? You want to conduct original research, deliver a needed service, gain new knowledge, purchase equipment, books, or computers, travel to new lands, support your community, or support your salary, like if you're an educator. What's your reason? Please select now.
And Kyle, really quick, so it looks like it's still on the introduction. So even though I see on the left you have your objectives, if you could click on it so everybody can see it.
Oh, can you see this? Are you on the why do I want to write a proposal screen?
No, we're on the introduction screen.
I've advanced my slides, so I don't know how that happened. But
Yes, thank you. We're on objectives now. Thank you.
what do you see on your screen?
So we see the first steps.
Okay, we're right on. So now, that was a polling question. Here's the polling slide. So if you've all responded to that, can we see the results of that? Great. So it looks like the majority of you want to fund a worthwhile project and then deliver a needed service, support your community. Those are the highest ranking ones. So that's good to know. Okay, let me close this. Um, what I'd like to share before I dive into the details of proposal development is just to share that we are currently living in some times of unprecedented funding around environmental justice issues. And as the congressman alluded to, environmental justice deals with a whole lot more than just what you might typically think of as the environment, like plants and animals and nature and global warming and things like that. But the environment can be the built environment. What we're talking about here are like communities that have urban blight, a lot of closed businesses, a lot of abandoned businesses. Um, Crumbling infrastructure is an environmental issue because they have a public health implication to them. So there there are several initiatives that our agency and other agencies have that are addressing these concerns and putting millions, if not billions of dollars out there in grant monies that are available to communities to tap into. And I'll share some more information about that in the presentation as we go along. So some general questions that for you to consider are, first, give some thought to what are your proposal writing strengths and what are your challenges, if you've ever asked yourself that question. And what is your area of interest? Say, for instance, are you interested in the science, technology, engineering, and math programs for a school if you're an educator? Are you interested in, say, developing a workforce development program for your community? Or are you interested in a specific niche community like the elderly because you need services for the elderly in your community? Or perhaps youth programs? And then what topics are most important to you regarding proposal development? Is it budget preparation? Is it you need to know some of everything or how to construct a problem statement? We're going to go through elements of that in this presentation. In terms of the freedom of having your own money for nonprofits, you lose power and self-esteem by continuously relying on others for program support. Many people are not adept at fundraising tactics. So when you're a nonprofit and you're seeking funding, grants can be, really the lifeblood of your organization so that you can do good in your community. You also feel better about your efforts and your role and the organization in general when you have ample funding to operate your programs. And money is an antioxidant against negative attitudes from yourself and others. But whatever your interests are, there's probably a funder out there for you, as I mentioned before. And that's like whether you're an educator or whether you represent a faith-based institution or you're just an individual that's starting a nonprofit and planning to do charitable work in your community. The rationale for applying for grants is to help nonprofits to address the needs of the organization and the surrounding community, and to help all groups learn that they must partner with each other in order to be successful. So why choose federal money? Well, first of all, it's your money. As taxpayers, you know, particularly in Black and Brown communities, we are perhaps the only demographic in the country that pays taxes and never requests or demands anything in return for that. But the government has not always been successful in identifying challenges or problems in communities, and therefore they offer grants for nonprofits who are closer to the pulse of issues to be able to identify programs that could address certain ills or address a certain concern, like targeting specific demographics like at-risk youth in the inner city. Um, Here in the metro Atlanta area, a lot of conversations have sprung about regarding um, programs for youth, and there's a direct correlation between the crime rate and the suspension of youth programs like 24-hour like midnight basketball leagues and things like that, things that keep kids out of the street and engaged in athletic programs where they're being mentored and things like that, and also being taught some life skills, because it's that old adage about idle hands are the devil's workshop. Well, you give young people things to do that are constructive, and it keeps their mind off of getting into mischief, especially like when school is out during the summer and things like that. And so there's a critical need for these services in our communities, and there's now monies available in unprecedented funding amounts to address some of these needs if we have people who are interested in establishing nonprofits to take these kids on and put them in these constructive environments. It's an opportunity for your organization to do real public service, and it's another way for taxpayers to save money. That's why grants are around. So what strings are attached to getting grant money? Well, first of all, you must help all of the people in the target group, regardless of faith or political persuasion. You can't just say, write a proposal to an agency and use taxpayer dollars, and you're just going to help the people in your church congregation or in your outreach ministry. You have to cast a broader net, say if you're working with a school or say a group of schools in your community, and you're working with the young men or young ladies in that particular school district or in a particular school. So regardless of their faith or political persuasion, you have to offer support to them with your grant funding. And you cannot use federal government's money to recruit members for your church or your organization, but you can market to them just to let them know that you are an advocate working in your community. So how do you find a funder? You can search the web, the internet. You can ask a similar service provider from other communities, particularly if there are communities that has had success with grantsmanship. There's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out to them and asking to set up a mentor-protege relationship with you if you're a novice. Don't be rigid in your ideas, particularly when applying for federal funding, even though foundation funding can work on the smaller organizational levels and larger. For federal agencies, we like for you to collaborate and build collaborative relationships with different groups. That could be a cluster of community-based organizations, say representing similar issues in different counties or municipalities, or it could be a collaboration between, say, a community-based organization and an academic institution. There are some grants that only universities can apply for, but you as a community-based organization, you can go to that university and say, "Hey, are you applying for anything that requires a partnership with a community-based organization? Well, we'd like to partner with you." And you can also call or visit the funder, which whoever is funding that particular line of grants, whether it be the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, U.S. Department of Agriculture, whoever the agency is, they have a project officer, someone similar to myself, who would manage the project. And they would want to know if you are a community-based organization interested in applying for funding from that specific agency. Just establish a relationship with one individual, and it's like the adage of the squeaky wheel getting oiled, letting them know that, even if you don't know anything about what that agency offers, ask them, what kind of grants do you offer? Well, we're interested in these particular things in our community. Do you have any grants that address community development or revitalization? You Build a relationship. Grantsmanship is really fundamentally at its core all about relationship building. And many of us often operate in silos thinking that, I know everything I need to know, so I don't want to build partnerships or share my ideas with other people that might take my idea and make money off of it or have successes that I can't have. But you really harm yourself and your organization when you don't cast a broad net by going to things like city council meetings and chamber of commerce meetings and just getting to know who are the people in your community that are decision makers. These are the people that you need to let your interest known to them, that you have a nonprofit or you're starting a nonprofit to address a critical need in your community. And then they can then open doors for you that you didn't know existed by letting you know about grants that maybe you can apply for, or grants that them as a municipal government or a county government can apply for and include you as a community partner because they know you're out there doing the work at the grassroots level. All politics are local. In terms of planning ahead, once you've identified a potential sponsor, obtain and review the guidelines from the agency that's funding the grant and all other materials pertinent to preparing a proposal for that particular sponsor. Continuing with planning ahead, you also want to meet with your organizational leaders and members of the target group. If you plan on addressing a problem with, say, youth and crime in your community, and you haven't talked to any of the schools where these students go and in the communities and PTA meetings and things like that, then you're doing yourself a disservice. Um, Reviewers of grants often can read into your grant to see that you haven't made any inroads with the actual people you plan to support with funding from an agency. So we'd look for typically letters of support and endorsement from, say, the schools in the service area or the boys and girls clubs or whatever, if you're looking to support youth programs. So meet with the people who are going to be in your target audience. If you want to, say, teach sustainability practices, say, to business owners who own daycares in your community, because some people have daycares operating out of their homes, and if they're older homes, they might have lead-based paint and other environmental hazards and asthma triggers and things like that. But there are standards that must be kept that are sometimes um, inspected upon, but there's just things that you can teach people who own daycares, whether they be legitimate or something like home owned kind of thing, but just simple things that you can teach them in terms of keeping them clean, removing asthma triggers and tripping hazards and all of these things so that they are environmentally safe so they don't incur liabilities if something should happen. If you want to teach things like that, meet with your target group. You meet with all of the daycares in your general service area and find out how they are equipped to address environmental hazards and toxic chemicals and things like that and storage in their facilities, and then propose to educate them on what the national standards are and what they can do to come into compliance. That could be a grant. You can start with a large group and work to a smaller group and make sure that all of your partners stay involved.
Mr. Bryant, really quick. So it's still showing that as a split screen, so we can see your main screen, and then we see your next slide. So we're getting several people letting us know that it's a little distracting.
Oh, I didn't know that that was doing that. Okay.
Sure.
I'm not sure how to close this from this, but
That's a little better. At least we see one slide at a time.
all right, yeah. That would have been helpful 15 slides ago, but okay. All right. So the next step before you launch into the proposal development process, consider the following questions. Do you have sufficient time to prepare a high quality proposal? That's important. Um, what many people who want to dive into the nonprofit space often have is they have high passion, but they don't correlate their passion with time because most people are often working a day job. And what I consider the grants nonprofit side is often your play job. So in my line of work, I've always used my day job, what I get paid a salary for, to pay for my play job, to get it off the ground, the things I'm really passionate about. One thing that has always been a sticking point for me is I have so many colleagues that I went to college with, and we're now in the working world doing whatever, and they still, you know, have the things that they're passionate about, and they might, like one of my friends, his sons play baseball and they're on traveling league teams, and every year, like clockwork, I can count on him to reach out to me trying to sell me tickets to some banquet because they're trying to raise money to rent a van to take the team out of town on a trip in St. Louis or somewhere for some league tournament or to buy new uniforms or whatever the needs are. Um, but I always say to him, you really need to start a nonprofit because, you know, you're doing something honorable and supporting the community. The community benefits from you being a coach of a little league team, and you're keeping kids engaged in something that's meaningful and positive. But a nonprofit is a better way to go than always trying to stand at intersections with your helmets or a bucket collecting money. I mean, that can solve a few problems, but for the long-term goal, you really need to be organized as a nonprofit. And like your whole athletic league, whether it's a series of teams rather than just your son or your son's team, but organize a nonprofit because there is money out there and you can couch it in a number of ways. And there's several agencies that could fund. It's like, who's going to fund a little league team? Well, they're not if you're going to just call it a little league team, but what's the benefit of a little league team, really? What kind of problems does having a little league team solve for a community? As I mentioned, it keeps kids off the street. It gives them something productive to do. What else does it do that might be of a benefit to the community? Well, there's this such thing called childhood obesity and the need for kids to be more engaged in physical activity. And there are grants in the public health sector that address childhood obesity. And one way to solve that is say, we're going to keep kids engaged in athletics because athletics isn't the same as like when most of us adults, I don't know how old most of the people are on this call, but recess used to be a big thing when I was a kid, and everybody had to go to recess. And so those who enjoyed it, it was great, but they made everyone uh, do exercise. And being that we live in a computer age and the information age, when most people are sedentary, even our kids sit in front of iPads and gaming systems all day. They don't have the same physical exercises that we had when we were kids. So it's a public health crisis because we don't want a future generation of couch potatoes and people who have all sorts of heart ailments and kidney disorders because they just snack all day and sit in front of a TV screen or a computer monitor or a gaming console and don't have physical exercise. So that is a public health issue that we need to address, and that's one creative way to address it by addressing it from the in terms of limiting childhood obesity. Also, you want to ask yourself, are the facilities and space available to you appropriate and sufficient for the project that you're proposing? In other words, if you're operating a program, a nonprofit out of your home, is that available? Is that space sufficient for what you're proposing to do? Let's use the same example of a Little League program and supporting that. Would you have to rent out space from a local parks and recs facility? Or see if you can that could be donated from the city or county that operates that space because they don't have that particular programming available right now. Uh, so you have to find out if there is a cost associated with that, or what we call F&A costs, facilities and administrative costs. Like if you're going to use, say, a community resource room to teach ballet to young ladies in the community, and they need to use electricity and the power to get access to that building after hours, then that's a cost that maybe the owner of the building or the county or Parks and Recs department would want you to cover under your grant. So make sure you get all those details. Also, does the sponsor allow full recovery of facilities and administrative costs? These are known as indirect costs. Like if you had to rent out a building and pay for electricity to lease this space or what have you, does the agency in their solicitation say you can recover these? Then you need to add that to your budget. And does the sponsor require any cost sharing of direct costs? That means, if you are, uh, I would encourage most people to apply for grants that don't have a cost share to them. That way you don't have to have the monies to contribute to the program that you're planning to implement, but it's just funded outright. Federal government money is not easy to obtain nor to keep. So only committed, disciplined, and tenacious individuals need to apply. Applicants or institutions need to have some history of successful public service, and groups must partner or have a 501c3 nonprofit designation. And that's just an IRS designation certifying you as a nonprofit. And I would encourage people who are novices at this and don't know anything about that, we can talk about that um, in detail later, what that process looks like. But it starts with you finding a name for your organization. And most people would like on a lot of faith-based organizations name organizations after their church, and things like that. And I would discourage that only because 80% of funding comes from secular named organizations. It could be related to a church, but don't make this the outreach ministry of Second Baptist Church, but call it, something like a helping hand organization of South Fulton, Georgia, or what have you. Just give it a name that refers or implies what your mission is. When I talk about applicants or institutions having some history of successful public service, document what you've been doing. You just don't start from nowhere with an idea that you want to do something good in the community. If you haven't documented history, just talk about who you've talked to in the community and say what brought you to this point of wanting to engage and actually become an official nonprofit organization to supply this need. You can say you've lived in this community for 20 years and you've noticed that there's a decline in programs for the youth. And so as a result, you did some research and you've been going to youth groups and sitting at Boys and Girls Club meetings and PTSA meetings and finding out where there was a challenge, and you seek to fill that challenge by creating this new entity. But you have relationships and touch points with other existing organizations that are providing something to the same constituency. In terms of a cheat sheet for grant seekers, you also want to know, will the agency you're applying to fund your needs? In other words, you don't want to apply to you don't want to apply for a public health grant to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. You want to make the proposal meet a need that that specific agency has. And most federal agencies are siloed, that they have certain things that they're known for. And there is some overlap, but just make sure that what you're applying for, you can articulate how that agency should be able to fund your program. Like if I'm applying for the Environmental Protection Agency for a grant on environmental justice, but say I'm a language arts instructor at a local university. Well, one would automatically think, well, what's language arts got to do with environmental protection or environmental justice? Well, you have to make the case then. Um, I want to use this environmental justice grant in language arts to teach my language arts students and journalism students how to be environmental reporters, how to document environmental impairment, and how to do digital storytelling by taking pictures of environmental impairments in their community. Because we're going to have an art showing and a poetry slam or something about environmental issues as the focus. And so then EPA can say, oh, well, that's a novel way to do it, to educate people through another lens. So this is worthy of funding. So don't just limit yourself by what you think is the usual suspects of the agencies that would fund your project, but think broadly about who else could fund a project that you're interested in. Also seek to find out what are the eligibility requirements. In other words, each funding agency would tell you who's eligible to apply and who isn't. And if you're unsure about whether your organization is eligible or not, you can still reach out to that project officer and they will have their contact number in that solicitation and say, hey, I represent a local chapter of a national fraternity and we want to have a recycling program with this school. Are we eligible for this grant? Because you say, it can't be an academic institution or it can't be a college or university. Well, we're semi-affiliated with a university, but we represent a community-based organization. We're a graduate chapter. So are we eligible? Yes or no? But it's best to learn that before you dive into writing a proposal so you don't waste your time. Also ask how many pages and what font is required. They are very specific in these solicitations saying that, your proposal should not be more than 20 pages. And it should be in Times New Roman size 12 font. The reason for that is just basically to see if you can follow basic instructions. And so if you can do that, then it's easier for the reviewer. Each grant that is applied to from some community-based organization is reviewed by another human being, a grant reviewer, who's going to read your proposal from beginning to end to see if you followed instructions and then to see what your proposal says in it to see if it's worthy of being funded. So if we ask for Times New Roman font in .12 size font and you give it to them in Calibri or Arial font because that's your favorite font, then they're going to disqualify you. So it's just seeing if you can follow instructions because they have to read it and be able to get to the meat of the matter. And the first things that are obvious that are a distraction will count against you. Next, you want to find out, are there any priorities or preferences listed by the agency? In other words, some agencies will put out a solicitation for a grant and they'll say that, this particular line of funding and this particular grant is targeted for at-risk communities, or minority communities that are located near hazardous waste sites, or communities within the state of Georgia. They will speak to certain priorities if they have funds that are allocated for a specific target group, or proposals for addressing the elderly homeless population within the Southeast. So make sure you speak to those priorities in your proposal. Also, preferences may be for competing continuations. These are just like things that are recurring funding around certain topics. And there are other people that might have gotten these grants in the past, but you represent a community that hasn't applied for these funds before. So you can throw your hat in the ring for that. Also, preferences may be for specific subsets of the population, like I mentioned just before, like women, teens, the disabled, or what have you, or for disadvantaged communities. The priority means that the applicant's score is enhanced by speaking to that priority. You also want to find out how many awards will the agency grant. Um, Most often, these agencies will say, we have $1 million that we will fund for, 100 grants nationwide. So if you think, say, with the Environmental Protection Agency, we have 10 regions of the country. And if we have one grant, we're giving out 100 grants nationwide. What headquarters tries to do and the funding region tries to do is say, well, we will try to equitably distribute these funds to all of our 10 regions. So that means 10 regions would get 10 of those grants each. So then you have to decide for yourself, um, will your proposed project be one of those 10? And how competitive would the market be if they're only giving out 10 grants in this region alone? What's the likelihood of your project being funded? Is it worthy enough? And are there any matching requirements? Next thing I would encourage you to do is read the application thoroughly. And after you do that, really read the application thoroughly. Um, Most of the questions you have about who is eligible, what can you do, what can't you do, should I even be applying for this, for writing for a proposal that this agency wouldn't fund, read the application and understand it. And most agencies offer what they call pre-awards technical assistance, which is where you can get your questions answered, because there's no dumb question except the one you never asked. So read the application thoroughly and make sure you understand what it is that they are funding, because they try to put it in plain English. But oftentimes, if you have some nuance to your project you just need clarification on, and you just can't figure it out by what you've read, reach out to the project officer of that solicitation. What's the next step? The interested parties should discuss the ideas to be presented in the proposal with their leadership and arrive at an agreed upon approach. Don't just be a maverick and say, "Oh yeah, there's a solicitation for this grant. It's a $250,000 grant for my community. I'm just going to write it on my own." And you haven't talked to anyone on your executive board or in your organization about this. And so they might have a difference of opinion. They might have other information about other people who should weigh in on it to enhance and embellish your proposal. So never just go about it alone. Talk about it even with members um, of your organization or members of the impacted community, saying, I'm interested in applying for some federal funding to address the need to educate this community on environmental justice issues and find out in with the stakeholders and or gatekeepers in your community, the people who have power and influence in your community that everyone listens to or heeds the advice of, and see what they think about it. Next, share your thoughts. Here you want to discuss your ideas with your organization's leadership. If you're faculty and staff, this is like your department chairs or the school district grants officer. And if it's nonprofits, this is like your executive board. Um, for those who are novices at this and are not yet in a space of belonging to a nonprofit, all nonprofits should have an executive board, and these are people that could advise you on what's needed and what's forecasted, what they see going on in the community, and they can give you advice. Not only do executive boards um, help fund the operation and the governance of a nonprofit, but they give you sound advice and they bounce ideas off of you and you off them when you're on the right track or when you're going off the rails and pursuing something else. And they can give you political insights as well. But it's important that they know what you're proposing as to whether it should be modified or enhanced in some way. So don't forget to plan your work and to work your plan. Discuss equipment and where it's going to be housed. And this is critical because I've seen organizations, whether they be a part of a university or what have you, that has written a proposal for their department or just as an individual written a grant for some fancy piece of equipment, say lab equipment, and then they did not consider where it would be housed. I've seen professors write off to get funded for $1 million piece of equipment like a mass spectrophotometer, and then realize that the university leadership says, hey, where are you going to put this? You know, we got to build an addendum to our building just to house this because this machine needs to be cooled in a certain type of environment. It has certain level of um, power it takes, and this is going to be an extra cost to the university. Why did you write this proposal without going through us about this? So now the university either has to say, thanks for this piece of $1 million equipment, but we can't receive it because it's going to cost us another 250,000 to build this addendum onto our building just to house it. So on a much smaller scale, one of the first grants I ever wrote for a nonprofit organization wasn't for money, but it was for technology. It was for equipment. And so it was for, with that grant, we received a laptop projector and an LCD projector, a laptop, sorry, and a fax machine, a copy machine, and a portable screen, as well as software. And one of the biggest fights occurred when one of the individuals wanted to keep the laptop for herself. But so you have to decide where's the equipment going to go, who's going to be responsible for checking it out, or who gets to use it, what's it being used for. It's not like you just got a gift and so I want to take this and someone else wants the camcorder or what have you, but have some clear discussions with your board and your membership on who's using the equipment and what for what purposes. After the grant's over, the equipment still belongs to the organization. So you could still be checked out, but it could be used for anything, but as long as it's used for the stated purpose in the proposal, if it's funded. Next, you want to solidify partnering relationships early in the process. And you do this by getting letters of support and letters of commitment from your community partners. If you're going to be teaching an after-school program with say, at-risk teens at some of the tier 1 schools in your community, make sure you have a letter of support from that school or from the PTSA saying that we agree and we support your mission in your organization for having this after school program for our at-risk youth at these middle schools in our county or what have you. Don't become dazzled. Essentially, federal agencies and foundations want the same information. Foundations and federal agencies want you to answer questions in clear and concise terms and use the format or the guidelines that you receive from the funder. So what if we haven't kept data? You may have to delay your goals for a year or so. So start keeping records on what you're doing. And to speed up the process, your organization's leadership may cultivate the agency by visiting, calling, or using other influences. As I said, going to city council meetings and handing out business cards or brochures that you make about your organization or what you propose to do, and get ideas on where you can plug into other resources in your community that are operating already. Improving your success through grantsmanship. It's a lot like proposal development's like reading a recipe. If you can read and follow instructions, you're over the first barrier. The key to getting past the first barrier is not being confused by the vocabulary. So you follow the recipe. You introduce your organization's previous successes. You describe your group's qualifications as an applicant for funding. And in an application to a foundation or federal agency, be as extensive as allowed in the introduction or background statement. So you gather your ingredients. When you see terms like rationale, problem statement, justification, statement of needs, assessment of needs, all of these terms are synonymous. They mean the same thing. When funders use these terms, they want hard data. Compare your data on at least two levels to illustrate your need. In terms of understanding the vocabulary, these are also synonymous terms: the introduction, the program narrative, the purpose, the background statement, applicant capabilities, and qualifications. These are all asking you to tell us about yourself, your organization, your purpose, why you're doing what you're doing. These are the basic parts of a proposal: the introduction, the rationale, the methodology, key personnel, evaluation, and the budget. And I'll go through each of these. The introduction clearly establishes who is applying for funds. So that's the name of your organization, or if you're doing it as a joint venture with a group of organizations or another organization or academic institution or with the city government, clearly say who is the organization to be funded under this grant. And it also describes your purposes and goals. It describes your programs and activities and leads logically to your problem statement. In other words, the problem that your grant proposes to solve. And it's as brief as possible, but it has interesting or wow statements in it, and it's free of jargon. When I say wow statements, I'm saying like the ideal problem statement in the introduction starts out with something that the reviewer didn't know, but they are intrigued by the statement and they want to know more about it, so they'll read further. Like you could say something like, according to incite relevant statistics, if you have them, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But say, according to a recent survey by the American Children's and Families Foundation, over 60% of the daycares operating in the U.S. Have environmental hazards in them. And that's a wow statement. That's saying, well, wow, tell me more about that. What environmental hazards are associated with daycares, and why is it so many? Why isn't anyone doing anything about it? And then you go into it and tell them about, well, a lot of these are unpermitted daycares and they're out of people's homes and they live in all kinds of conditions. And so there's no standard nor any enforcement way to police all of these because there's no database of where they all are licensed. For program objectives, don't use words like to provide, to establish, or to create to begin your objectives. Instead, use other words like to increase, to decrease, to reduce, to indicate measurable objectives. Our organization plans to increase financial literacy among high school students by the end of this program. This organization plans to decrease the number of kids who go home hungry because they don't um, have enough snacks or enough healthy food options after they leave school. Or our goal is to reduce the amount of children with childhood obesity within the state of Georgia. These are measurable objectives, so use this terminology. Also tell how you'll implement your project. The funder will probably ask how you plan to implement the objectives. This section is known as the methodology, where the proposal goes into a funded program and out comes the deliverables. Continuing with the recipe theme, blending the ingredients. Tell the funder how you'll address your needs and objectives to achieve the desired outcome. In the methodology, the terms may be different, but you always want to concentrate on the how. Look for these terms: methodology, implementation, strategy, plan of operation, statement of work, description of work. All of these terms are synonymous. So if you see this, that's what they're asking you. How do you plan to implement this? Discuss key personnel. In this section, discuss the persons who will be paid specifically. What are they qualified? Why are they qualified to manage this program? Include a job description if you have not yet found a person to manage a key component of the program. Here's 6 deadly phrases to avoid in proposals. Best efforts. We will put forth our best efforts. This is a legal requirement to go beyond normal duty. We will ensure. This is a binding legal agreement. We guarantee. This amounts to a warranty. Partner in partnership. This assumes liability for each other's acts, debts, and omissions. So if you have a partnership and you're partnering with an organization, make sure that they say in their letter of support, we are partnering with you on this. This is not we're supporting your organization in this effort, but we are your partner in this, and understand what that means, that both of you have weight to pull. We will meet your needs / requirements. This holds you liable. Or jointly. This is ownership will be shared by other parties. If you don't have a joint venture with an organization, you either have a partnership or a collaboration. Testing the recipe for results. Think of an evaluation as having 2 components: a product evaluation and a process evaluation. The product evaluation examines the extent to which the program has achieved its stated objectives, the extent to which the accomplishment of the objectives can be attributed to the program. A process evaluation asks, has the program been conducted in a manner consistent with the plan? And are the activities of the program clearly related to the effectiveness of the program? In developing an evaluation strategy, you might choose to do things like a pre and post test assessment. In other words, you want to find out what your cohort of after school program students know about, say, financial literacy. So you might give them a pre-test on financial literacy. Like, how many of you own a checking account? How many of you know anything about financial literacy? And Based on the results of that test, they might know nothing whatsoever. Then at the end of that program, give them the test again, and they should have significantly improved by what you've taught them. So that's pre and post test assessments. Also, you can have focus groups, which say you want to say invite, say 20 members from your community to talk about what's the biggest issues that your community faces and how do you want to prioritize them? Do you think it's a lack of youth programs, a lack of services for the elderly? Is it crime? Is it traffic? Is it gentrification? Do a focus group with your community and find out what their issues are, what really ignites their energy and their passion, and what they think is noteworthy for pursuit. And then their satisfaction surveys and on and on. These are just things you can do to evaluate what's a noteworthy project to pursue. In terms of a satisfaction survey, this is an example. A satisfaction survey will be administered to 3 groups: students, teachers, and the participating schools and parents. Using a Likert scale, participants will be asked to report experiences with the new mathematics program and related activities. Frequencies will be generated. A Likert scale is simply like rate 1 to 5. What do you think about this program? Where 1 being the poorest and 5 being this is awesome. The data will be reported in a summary document and submitted to participating schools, the project director, educational partners, and interested parties for use in planning improvements in future programs. I also encourage you to use graphics to highlight text. If you have a proposal and you're talking about, say, working with having after-school programs for at-risk youth, I would have a photo of, say, youth in a Boys and Girls Club playing basketball, or in a group setting with a coach or someone standing there talking to them, but have an image so that the viewer gets in mind exactly what you're proposing to do and what that looks like. You can also include charts, organization charts about how your organization is structured, or your project workflow, a workflow diagram saying where you're going to start and how you are going to run through your program and get to achieving your outcomes, or your decision making, like a logic model and things like that. You can have tables that show like a timeline of when you propose to start, once you get funded, and when the program will end, and the targets and the milestones you're going to hit along the way. Also, a skill matrix. Say you could have this like a table of these are the people that we're hiring, and the contracted staff and the subject matter experts and their years of expertise in this field, justifying why we need to be funded to pay these people an honorarium to come and speak to our youth or to run these specific portions of our program, and your staffing loads. Also use figures, financial figures and statistical to, especially like with your budget, of course, and pictures, like I said, to document, um, give an example of what that looks like for your project. Like a performance chart could have different things like a bar chart similar to this. As far as the budget is concerned, there's a 2-part budget. There's a summary budget and a budget narrative. The summary budget has basic categories shown in summary, and you should arrange this material so that the numbers line up, so it's easier for the reviewer to see that they add up. And the budget narrative is where you would discuss why you need each line item and include the numbers again. In developing a budget, you want to look for things like direct costs, which are for personnel. This is salary. The fringe, which includes fringe benefits also, like workman's comp, insurance, vacation, Social Security, and pension. Include that in your salary. And also other direct costs, like if you have a consultant, a grant writer, or for travel, any needed travel for the grant, including paying for mileage to and from, say, your home to your travel location, whether it's, the local community center or wherever. if you're traveling throughout the state to meet at different schools or within the county or what have you. The other direct costs include equipment. Equipment is anything that costs more than $5,000. Anything less than $5,000 is considered a supply. So that's something that you would, you know, keep in mind if you want to buy laptops to teach a after school coding class for students, and that comes to over $5,000, then that is equipment. But if you're just getting like one computer and you're going to have a projector to go to it and students are just taking notes with it and that comes to under $5,000, then that's a supply. Also, any subcontracts you have, say you're going to subcontract with a local restaurant to provide sandwiches for the people you invite to community capacity building meetings, and you're educating them on, um, say, environmental issues in your community. But in order to keep their attention, you got to feed them. So you subcontract with, say, the nearest Subway or Publix, and you get sandwiches made and, you know, a couple of cases of soft drinks and bottled waters for your attendees. And indirect costs are things like I mentioned before, like facilities and administrative costs, like keeping the lights on, paying electric bills, things like that, rental of space for meetings, and matching costs and cost sharing are not required on contracts, but we're dealing with grants specifically right now. This is a spreadsheet of what a typical budget would look like. You would have to have some knowledge of how to use Excel, or you could do it in Word, but it's better to do it in Excel where it would keep track of your adding and subtracting. If you don't have a person in mind for the job, say to be, as this spreadsheet shows, an environmental scientist, that hiring person is to be determined, say if they're going to do some sampling work for you, you can give a range of salaries for that particular task or that particular position. At the high end, say they would be paid 45,500, and the middle level would be 38.5, and the entry level, someone fresh out of school would say an environmental scientist degree but no experience, would be paid at a different level. That way, the agency sees that you've given consideration to experience and were able to price out what you're going to hire for and budget appropriately. Some budget no-nos to be considerate of: math errors. That's why I said to use Excel or some sort of spreadsheet software and get someone who is proficient with doing that if you don't have that skill set yourself. Um, Also, another no-no is having no justification or no clear role for the personnel or consultants. You can't just write off a proposal and name your spouse as a project officer so they can have a salary along with yours. The reviewer will see right through that unless they have a role to play, and you have to clearly articulate that in your proposal. Or a third year request for equipment. Say if it's a 3-year grant, that's a big red flag. If they see you're buying equipment on your last year of the grant, you should buy all your most expensive equipment and supplies your first year of funding, if it's a multi-year funding grant. Also, if the budget exceeds the allowable amount, if it's $100,000 grant and you ask for 250,000, yeah, that's not gonna fly over too well with the reviewers. Also, if the budget was insufficient, that's not like asking for not enough money. You plan to, say, do outreach to 3 high schools in your community, in your county, but you asked for $10,000, but you're going to do outreach to over 400 students at 3 different high schools. That's not enough money to do that. So have a sense of what it's going to really take for you to do the work. And also, if any of the forms are incomplete, that's a no-no. You want to make the reviewer remember your application. So the justification, rationale, or needs assessment is one of the most critical parts of the proposal. Use statistics and data from authoritative sources and testimony from persons known to be knowledgeable about the situation. And make the reviewer remember your data. And since all of the applications are submitted electronically through grants.gov for the federal applications, don't upload it without the following: an abstract or summary, a table of contents, a transmittal letter, and your letters of support. Understand the rules of the game. Tailor each of your proposals to meet the specific requirements of the program announcement. Make the proposal easy to read and use a systematic approach. Set up the crime, commit the crime, then solve the crime. What does that look like? You set up the crime by, in your problem statement, stating that, you know, the the city of Lithonia, Georgia, has a problem with high crime being committed by young offenders. That's the crime. So you've spelled out what the issue is. So then what we produce, what we are proposed to do as the ABC organization of Lithonia is to set up after school programs um, and collaborate with the local law enforcement agencies to start a police athletic league and to solve two problems. One, to teach them an athletic skill set, but also to make them less agitated when confronted by the police because they'll be familiar with them or to them and solving the crime. This will make the community a much safer place because now the youth feel safe around the police. They don't fear them. They don't have any animosity towards them because they see them as coaches and mentors rather than just someone waiting to throw them in jail. So you spell out how you would put that package together and avoid the big no-nos: failing to follow the directions, trying to hide service programs as research, applying for projects beyond your training or expertise, asking for too much or too little money, failing to obtain the organization's permission. Don't go rogue. Writing a $1 million proposal in 3 days. Don't do that. Forgetting to give the agency or foundation what it wants. That's critical. Finding money to pay your salary. There's nothing wrong with paying a salary, but say if you make $50,000 a year in your day job and now you're running a nonprofit, you can say that's what your base salary is, but you're not going to spend 100% of your time doing that nonprofit work. So say if only 10% of your time is working with a nonprofit, your salary should be 10% of that $50,000, which is $5,000. So keep that in mind. And applying blindly on an announcement, try not to do that too. I'm going to breeze through this. This is conducting the literature search for your proposal content. You can use journals, specialty libraries like the National Library of Medicine, conference proceedings, institute homepages, government publications. Here's a screenshot of like the National Library of Medicine. Here they have just one of the references. These are references and abstracts from over 4,300 biomedical journals. Say if you have an interest in addressing prostate cancer in African American male populations in your community, you would go to a site like this to get information. And you can go to things like the National Library of Medicine and say, okay, you can say in this a search window, tobacco cessation in African Americans. Say you want to stop teens and even African American adults from smoking cigarettes, then find out what research is already done on that and who has produced scholarly research on that matter, and then cite it, quote it in your proposal. This adds credibility to what you're proposing. Also, these are just other screenshots of where you could get information. The Academic Press Journal, Home Press, you can choose any topic and find cited research on those things. As I mentioned about the prostate cancer, where you can get information to put in to make your problem statement more like a wow statement, because you can talk about cancer in the African American community and prostate cancer in African American males specifically. You can also do a search on Google and in Google Scholar for things like cancer and clearinghouse and get information. This is 52,900 resources that you can search through for other things. How did I find these resources? Google.com. The last tips for everyone, be specific about buzzwords and jargon. Include a glossary if you use acronyms, because no one knows your acronyms but your organization. Don't assume that they know, what you mean when you're talking about, like I have to tell people EPA is the Environmental Protection Agency. Most people aren't familiar with the agency, so you have to let them know what your acronyms are. Don't take it personal if you don't get funded the first time, but prepare to give up having a life for about 2 months for first timers and 2 weeks for experienced persons. So, in summary, read the application, involve key administrators early, call a university office of sponsored programs, particularly state schools, because this is their grants office on a university campus, and all state schools have a public service mandate, so they have to offer assistance. And they can do a courtesy search for you or help you troubleshoot how to fine tune your project. Follow the guidelines that the agency prepares for you. Be aware of the correlation between money and time. Be prepared to alter your lifestyle temporarily, and be prepared to get a new attitude about external funding. So that's my presentation. And with this QR code here, I'd like you to take out your smartphones and scan this. This will take you to a flow page that I generated. And a flow page is basically it's a link that uses this one QR code to multiple links. And this gives you federal links to all of the EPA funding that I mentioned earlier in my presentation. We have grants, the Tic Tac program that I mentioned, they are a capacity building organization. And I have links to the two Tic Tacs that service our region on that site. You can go to their website and get technical assistance on how to get started, how to meet out what your proposal should be about, or if you want to explore funding on anything dealing with the environment or environmental justice or community capacity building, they can help you get started. I also have links to the funding that's currently available. Our Grant Makers grant is coming out now, and it's the solicitation hasn't hit the street yet, but we have 4 tiers to it. One of them is a $75,000 grant for community-based organizations, and you don't even have to have a 501c3 status. You just have to be registered as a nonprofit within your state. And you get that by registering your name with the state of Georgia Secretary of State's office and once that name is accepted, you pay that $25 registration fee. And there's an additional fee, I think, of $50 to be a nonprofit. And they can just say, okay, you're a nonprofit operating in the state of Georgia. And once you do that, you can apply for the $75,000 grant for funding. And then we have 3 tiers above that, $150,000, $250,000, and $350,000 grants for environmental justice related projects in helping to build the capacity and educate communities. And these are 1 to 3 year grants. And for those of you on this call who are more experienced grant writers, our community change grants are already on the street, and the deadline for submission is November 21st. These community change grants are revolutionary in that they are in 2 tiers. The first tier is $1 to $3 million grants, and the second tier is up to $20 million grants. And those grants, the tier 2 grants, are for, say, if you're in a rural community and you want to know how to get a grant to improve the infrastructure, the sewer infrastructure in your community, because most of your community citizens or residents are on sewer or on septic tanks, and they need to tap into the nearest sewer system for the city. Or the city needs to do upgrades, as we've witnessed here in Metro Atlanta, all of these imploding infrastructure lines, old sewer lines for the sewers that exist for Atlanta that existed 150 years ago. And now we've got all this greater need for water and sewage because we've built up our downtown with skyscrapers and high-rise apartments, and everybody has sinks and toilets and things like that. And when it rains, it overwhelms the system. So these grants can be used to improve in our infrastructure in those areas and just to educate people about it or educate people about the new environmental justice workforce development and energy justice, like solar farming is in. If you have land and you want to explore solar farming or even to teach people how to create solar farms or to create a company to install solar panels and solar farms in communities or on houses and communities. There is money out there for that. So I encourage you to reach out and to those resources on that, and you can reach out to me as well if you have questions about these resources. But thank you for your time, and I'll entertain any questions you have at this point. Let me stop sharing my screen so I can see if there's 29 questions in the Q&A. Okay, so
We're gonna take about 10 minutes for you to answer. So if you could pick just a few of them.
sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Karen Adler asks also want to conduct research. So if you can touch on that at some point. Sure, I would encourage you just to reach out to me directly, and if you can share with me what kind of research you're interested in, and I'd be glad to point you in the right direction of how you might go into that. This next question is violence in the community also an environmental issue? Yes, you can make that correlation, and there's a way to do that, Cynthia K. Lofton. Um, the way you would approach violence from an environmental standpoint is I like to use the example of public housing. Do you know, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of our public housing, our project housing was built on tainted land and it was made with substandard products because it was plentiful. And one of those substandard projects, substandard materials was lead-based paint. Lead-based paint, when it dries up, it cracks, and kids touch their walls. They touch the lead-based paint chips in the window sills. They put their hands in their mouth, and get exposed to lead. And lead is a particular contaminant to children, but it's a double contaminant because it causes neurological problems as a child, and it makes you hyper aggressive. It makes you want to fight, and you find out that whenever you think of project housing, you always think of places of violence and where there's gangs and where there's all these uncontrollable youth and people fighting all the time. A lot of that could be attributed to being exposed to lead in lead-based paint and being on top of contaminated soils that had lead in it and other contaminants, um, and other than just the quality of life issues. So you could make the case that violence in any impoverished community is an environmental issue. That's why you see with the gentrification that's taking place now in Metro Atlanta. And 5 years ago there wasn't a such thing as West Midtown. Now that there's all this development around Centennial Yards and the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, that old area known as the Bluff, which was one of the roughest communities in Metro Atlanta, is now being repackaged, repurposed, and rebranded as West Midtown. I knew it was gonna gentrification was coming when they changed the name of Bankhead Highway to Donald Lee Hollowell Parkway or what have you, because for years the slogan has been from Bankhead to Buckhead. The news media uses that. And what that means in code is from the poor black community to the affluent white community. And so where there are poor people, you're going to find incidences of violence are increased because people who do not have the knowledge base or the skill sets to change their living conditions, crime starts, people covet what they see every day. So if you have something that I don't, and my coping skills tells me, well, I'm going to take what I want because my family is starving too, then that's where crime incidences increase. So that's very much an environmental issue. So environmental justice deals with this whole phenomenon of linking the environment with these social determinants of public health, and us being exposed to living near landfills and polluting factories and bus transit stations and things like that has an impact on our health. And when you feel bad and you are chronically in a sense of malaise, you tend to be either too sickly, so you tend to fight more, and you tend to be, in a negative state of mind. So yeah, there's a direct correlation. So let me find another one. What is the relationship between environmental justice and STEM for youth? Sandra Carter. The relationship is environmental justice deals with every aspect of society. So we want the youth to be engaged in STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math. And so I always like to tell audiences that, you know, anything that is successful in life must mimic something that is already found in nature. And what do I mean by that? If you want apples, you don't just get apples. You have to start with an apple seed. And the apple seed in this question is synonymous with the youth. If you want scientists and engineers in the future, you start with the youth in primary school and in middle school and teaching them the fundamentals of science and getting them to love math and science and understanding their relationship to the environment. And if they build an aptitude for math and science in the primary grades, by the time they're in middle school, you can teach them the more sophisticated applications of environmental science, like earth sciences, like physical science. I didn't know that there were Black people in the space of physical science until after my freshman year at Fort Valley State University. I went there with the intentions of being a doctor or dentist because as a Black student who liked STEM careers, that's all I saw. Black doctors and dentists. I did not know you could be a Black physical scientist in the environmental space, but seeing one and then going for internships in nuclear weapons testing at the Department of Energy's Nevada test site opened my eyes to a new career field where no people that looked like me existed. So I was the first of 64 Black students that was working in the environmental field in nuclear weapons testing. And so I got to see what it was like to work in a career field, and I didn't have to go to med school for 4 years and 4 more years of residency, and I could still work with radiation, but in a totally different field. So I would just say, start with the youth, get them passionate about STEM, and then keep pushing them into advanced programs, start nonprofits, and introduce them to subject matter experts in different career fields because we are qualitative as a people. If we see it, we can be it. And that's my response to that. Let me see. Let me find another question. Let's see. Gwendolyn Ferris asks, can a partnership include an individual who is not a nonprofit but wants to serve under an existing nonprofit? Definitely. You can be a subject matter expert and work under a different nonprofit, and then they could bring you on as, they can apply for a grant and ask for funding to pay you for your expertise, whatever your area of expertise is. Like if you're a banker and you want to teach, financial literacy to youth or to single parent households or single mothers in at-risk communities, then you can do that, and then they can put you under an honorarium as a subject matter expert and pay you to teach a curriculum or just one segment and what have you. So yeah, that's entirely possible. You want me to stop there, Candace?
Sure, that's fine. You can stop.
Okay. Well,
Thank,
thank you all.
thank you so much.
Like I said, if you need to reach out to me directly, you could take down my email address. It's Bryant, Bryant, dot Kyle, Kyle, at epa.gov. I teach this. I'm the only certified grant writing instructor at EPA Region 4 that teaches this, but I also teach community capacity building. The next step in what you want to do is to understand the things that you must know as a community. We are in the information age, and communities need to know, have a sense of your resources, your values, your power, your history, and your institutional assets. And I teach you how to identify those so that the more equipped you are and more you know about your community, the easier it is for federal agencies to engage with you and find funding to meet your specific needs. Thank you for your time.
Okay, Mr. Bryant, this is Kathy Register. I'm the district director for Congressman Johnson.
Yes.
And I want to ask either Candace or Kelly to put your contact information in the chat because there was so many people that was asking for your information. Also, Mr. Bryant, there was folks who said that they were unable to access the QR code. So is there another way for them to access that information?
Yeah, I'll see if I can put it in the chat, but also it'll be on the last slide of the recording so they can get it from that as well.
Okay,
Um,
all right. And for those individuals who got on late,
I put mine
uh,
in the chat.
okay, the slides will be on the Congressman's website. That's www.hankjohnson.com house, house.gov in about 2 weeks. So you can go back to or come to the Congressman's website to acquire and review all of Mr. Bryant's slide presentations. And we want to thank everyone for joining day 2 of the Week of Hope, helping others to elevate. We are here to help elevate your efforts to assist others in the community. We hope that we have provided you with information from experts to make your nonprofits more successful. I want to thank Mr. Kyle Bryant for the invaluable information and for his support and partnership with the office of Congressman Hank Johnson. I also want to encourage you to join us for day 3 of our Week of Hope by going to the Congressman's website. Again, that's hankjohnson.house.gov, and you can register at the top of the page. Thank you for participating, and this concludes day 2 of the Week of Hope. Have a great afternoon. And for those of you whose questions were not addressed, Candace and or Kelly and or Caitlin will respond to your questions shortly after. Thank you again and have a great afternoon.